Today I want to answer the question, is it possible to turn McDonald's French fries into ketchup? So today let's just find out. Now today's recipe is definitely weird. I'm going to be fermenting the French fries and turning them into some sort of beer. This is one of those recipes I really don't recommend following. All right, I don't want to talk anymore. Let's just jump into the recipe.
Okay, so first let's start with some Big Macs. Just kidding. So I ended up ordering a bajillion French fries from McDonald's, and I definitely got a pretty odd look when I picked up the fries. Okay, so the first order of business was to pour out all the fries into a bowl and figure out exactly how much potato I actually have. Now some of you may be wondering, why am I wearing a flowery apron? Well, it turns out that it gives a +2 buff on alchemy and fermentation, and it definitely wasn't because I was fooled into thinking this might look cool, when in fact it just makes me look like I'm channeling morbidly obese Homer Simpson. Oh well. Now speaking of obesity, I have about 1 kilogram of French fries, and it's time to place these French fries into the blender and add some water. And I got to blending, turning these somewhat delicious fries into a mush of potato and sodium acid cryophosphate. Yum. Alright, so I repeated this for the entire 2 pounds of fries, leaving me a bowl of oily, artificially beef-flavored, chemical-ridden mashed potatoes. Now speaking of oil, we're gonna have to address that a little bit later. But right now I'm gonna turn these potatoes into sugar. Well, sort of.
To those who've seen the Oatly video, this may seem a little familiar. The main idea here is that potatoes are full of starch, and we can convert that starch into sugar by using an enzyme known as amylase. Now, if you're wondering what the heck I just said, definitely check out that Oatly video. I'll link to it.
Alright, now to turn the starch into sugar, I heated up the French fry smoothie up to basically boiling. And this is gonna gelatinize all of the starch that hadn't been gelatinized up to this point.
Amylase works best at around 165 degrees Fahrenheit or about 70 degrees Celsius. Much hotter than that and you can actually denature the enzyme or basically kill it. Now, considering that we just had it near the boiling point for gelatinization, we're gonna need to cool it down a little bit.
Alright, so once it's heated, I'm going to stir this and let it cool down so that I don't quote-unquote kill the enzyme amylase that's going to turn this starch into sugar. So I just turned off the heat and just kept stirring it to help it cool down faster. Alright, so I added in the amylase and then I'm just basically going to let this do its job for a little bit. Coming back to it, we can see that it stirs pretty easily, so it looks like the amylase did its job. Awesome. Okay, so now I have got a sugar potato smoothie, and let's address the fat in the room. Now, McDonald's French fries are deep fried in a mixture of canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, hydrogenated soybean oil, and natural beef flavor. Now, I love a hydrogenated soybean oil as much as the next guy, but I really don't want this in my ketchup. More importantly, I'm pretty sure the yeast ain't gonna like it, so let's try to get rid of it, or at least as much of it as we can. Now, to be honest, this turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it was gonna be. At first, my thinking was I'm gonna add in some water, and then the oil is less dense than the potato water, so it should just float on top, and I can scoop it off. Now, this sort of worked, but it wasn't very efficient, and it was taking a lot of the potato stuff with it. So I decided to chill the potato mass to about 37 degrees by popping it into the freezer for a few minutes. This solidified the fat and made it kind of easier to scoop off. And I was able to remove a bulk amount of it, but not all of it.
So one thing that was super weird about this fat was that it was super sticky, and it literally coated everything that I touched. And it was also really hard to get off of stuff. And I think the reason for that might be because of the hydrogenated soybean oil, but I'm not a chemist. So if you know the answer to the question here, please leave a comment down below and let me know what's going on here.
Alright, once I had done the best that I could do, it's time to finally make some French fry beer. But first, I gotta figure out how much sugar I actually have in these fries. See, I'm gonna need about a 5% alcoholic beer to make the ketchup. What this means is we're gonna need a certain amount of sugar for the yeast to ferment into alcohol to get to that high alcohol percentage. Now, usually for measuring sugar, I use this thing called a refractometer, which basically measures sugar by looking at how it bends the light. But when I tried to do this, the residual oil in the French fry juice stuck to the instrument and basically made measurements impossible. So I'm gonna have to rely on another method for measuring the sugar levels, known as a hydrometer. Oh, by the way, I should just say that everything from this point on has been sanitized with Star San. Okay, so the hydrometer is a calibrated buoyancy device. It floats to a certain level depending on the sugar concentration of the liquid it's submerged in. If the concentration's high, it basically will float a little bit higher. But the key criteria for this thing to actually work is that it actually has to float. And so the level of French fry juice that I have is way too low for this container. So I transferred it to a smaller container, and that almost worked. Now in reality, I probably should have used a graduated cylinder, but I didn't have one. And I didn't want to wait for it to come and have to make another day of filming. So in a bout of laziness, I made a terrible decision, which was to use the Nalgene bottle that I drink water from daily to measure the sugar concentration of this potato French fry juice. I knew it was a dumb idea at the time, but I just decided to keep going. And I can assure you that that water bottle still tastes like French fries even after I've washed it like 12 times. Although this worked, and I was able to tell that the sugar level was too low and would basically yield a beer that was only about 1 or 2% alcohol per volume. This is too low. So I decided to add in some sugar, and that's gonna help boost it.
So this is actually not the first time that these French fries have been exposed to sugar. When McDonald's actually makes their French fries, they take the raw potato, they cut it up, then they soak that starchy potato in water to just kind of remove a lot of the excess starch on the outside of the potato. They then take those potatoes and then soak it in a solution of water and dextrose, or basically sugar. And they claim that the reason that they do this is for the color, but we all know that sugar is a very powerful flavor enhancer. So it's a little bit fishy for sure. Another kind of fishy aspect of this is they're kind of doing the same thing that Oatly did, where basically they're arguing that since they removed the starch and then they're adding the sugar, they don't have to put this as an added sugar. Now, as far as I know, McDonald's has never been called out for this, but I don't know. All right, let's get back into it.
Okay, so I calculated how much sugar I needed to add, and then I dissolved that in a little bit of water, and then stirred it in, remeasured, and we're Gucci. So now all we have to do basically is ferment this. And to do that, I'm gonna add in some yeast, which will turn the sugar into alcohol. I also added in some yeast nutrient, and that's gonna help the yeast ferment this awful concoction. Time to seal it up and forget it exists for a few days. Looking at it partway through the fermentation, it's looking bubbly. So that's a good sign. It means the yeast is happy. So about 1 week later, I have some French fry beer. So you can see that it's kind of separated, and that stuff on top is alcohol. I sent a photo of this to a friend, and they were like, I'm kind of concerned about your health. And I was kind of as well. Okay, so at this point, I want to separate out the beer from the potato solids. And to do this, I just ended up straining it, and actually it worked really well. And after letting it settle for a little bit, this is my French fry beer. Now, as you can see, despite my previous efforts, there's still a substantial layer of fat on top. But thankfully, it's a little bit easier to remove at this point. I'm removing a little bit by little bit, but there's still some in there. Okay, so now I have French fry beer, and you may be asking yourself at this point, or maybe even beforehand, wait, I thought this guy was making ketchup. Why is he fermenting things? Did he forget what he was doing? And the answer is, yeah. What we have now is beer, and what we can do is we can turn that alcohol in the beer into vinegar. Now thankfully, yeast is happy enough to do that for us. It's gonna turn alcohol into acetic acid, but to help kickstart that process, we're gonna need to add in something else, which is known as a vinegar mother. Now, although that sounds like a hit band that I might want to see at, a music festival, it turns out it's just that weird stuff that floats at the bottom of your favorite bottle of vinegar. Now, this stuff is essentially a live colony of yeast and cellulose and bacteria, and it's kind of like that kombucha SCOBY. So I grabbed a bit of a vinegar mother from a bottle of apple cider vinegar that I have, and I just tossed in about a tablespoon of that into the beer. And also, I did save a little bit of this beer to try at the end of the video. Okay, now all we need to do is let this sit exposed to air, and the yeast will turn the alcohol into acetic acid. Now to do this, I just covered a mason jar with some paper towels, and that's just gonna keep the flies or whatever from getting in. Now when making vinegar, you should probably let this go for months. Basically, it's a slow going process. But it's already been a long time since I released my last video, and YouTube's starting to get angry at me, so I decided to let it go for a week. And a week later, it was smelling kind of vinegary and looking pretty gross. I also remembered that I have a separatory funnel, so I was able to get rid of that last bit of oil that just keeps sticking to freaking everything. I finally separated the vinegar out from the oil by using the separatory funnel, and I also thought maybe it's a good idea to test the pH. I just wanted to see how much acetic acid was in the vinegar as compared to, normal vinegar. And it's maybe about 1 value higher than distilled vinegar, so I'm pretty content with this. Now giving it a proper whiff is absolutely gross. Okay, so enough delaying the inevitable, it's time to taste that vinegar. After tasting it, it tasted absolutely terrible. Yeah, so please, 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 please do not make this at home. I don't want you all poisoning yourselves. After tasting this, I did give it a day, and I didn't have any adverse reactions, so I continued on with making the ketchup. So now it's just a matter of making the ketchup, and I'm gonna use a kind of cheater method, but if you wanna learn how to make ketchup the hard way, there's this really weird nerd who made a video about 2 years ago on it, and if you can stomach his repeated use of the word actually, it's not a bad video. So to make the ketchup, I heated up some water, I added in some sugar, and then some tomato paste, and then I added in some garlic and onion powder, and then finally the key ingredient, which is our French fry vinegar. I gave this a stir, and I got myself some gross ketchup. I poured it into a ramekin, and I'm gonna put this into the fridge to chill. Once it was cool, it's time for the taste test. So let's do that.
Okay, so I have my French fry beer here, and I am totally aware that nobody has asked me to do this. The hydrogenated soybean oil has coagulated on top, creating these nice little fat chunks. I'm just gonna pour a very little bit. It honestly doesn't smell bad. It actually smells kind of sweet and almost like florally, but let me just go ahead and give this a taste. Again, I don't know why I'm doing this. Actually, that's not so bad. I wouldn't go out of my way to drink this, but it doesn't taste that different from a hard seltzer with French fry flavoring, if that makes any sense. Yeah, definitely don't make this, but I would say I do challenge the channel Stillit to see if he can make a French fry liquor. All right, so that's the beer. Now let's move on to the ketchup. Okay, so I have the ketchup here and I have some French fries to actually try it. And I'm just gonna go ahead and do a taste test. And I'm only gonna film this once because I have a feeling this is not gonna be a very good, it's not gonna be good. Now, as far as it looks like ketchup, it does not smell like ketchup. It smells like pizza sauce that's like gone off and has somehow fermented. Let me just go ahead and taste the ketchup now. Oh, I really don't want a lot of this. It's awful. Hopefully if I'm not in the hospital, I'll be releasing another video soon. In the meantime, if you like this kind of content and you like watching somebody torture themselves, please consider subscribing. I'll leave a thing up here for that. All right, I'll see you guys later.